Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. What happens when an alien ship, many deemed unfixable, finally get a pair of human hands on it? I think we all know. Check if you're subscribed, because if you're not, do it today. It's totally free. But now, let's get into the story. The stale, recycled air of the Valorian space station pressed against Jace like a damp blanket. Around him, towering structures hummed with an alien efficiency that felt more intimidating than impressive. He'd seen pictures, of course, but nothing truly prepared him for the sheer scale of the Valorians' technological prowess. Their metal hallways gleamed, their uniforms shimmered, even their damn air seemed to vibrate with an energy that screamed, "We are beyond you." And maybe they were, technologically. Jace wouldn't argue that. But as he shifted the toolbox on his shoulder, he felt a familiar thrum of excitement, a callus forming on his palm from years of coaxing groans from stubborn engines and coaxing life back into dying circuits. He might not understand the alien hieroglyphics scrolling across the walls, but he understood machines. And right now, the Valorians needed him to understand one machine in particular. "Here she is," boomed a voice, the translated words echoing strangely from the implant in Jace's ear. Commander Theron, a mountain of a Valorian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes like molten gold, gestured towards the open docking bay. And there she was, the Victorious. Even damaged, the warship was a masterpiece of alien engineering. Its hull, a deep, almost black purple, stretched the length of several football fields, bristling with weaponry that made Jace's gut clench. Yet, it wasn't the size or the firepower that captivated him, but the subtle tremor that ran through the ship, a disharmony in its hum that spoke of a deep-seated wound. "Our best engineers have been working on her for weeks," Theron continued, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible tremor of frustration. "The hyperdrive core is offline. They say it's irreparable." Jace felt a familiar spark of challenge ignite within him. Irreparable was a word he'd learned to distrust. It usually just meant nobody figured it out yet. He took a step closer, drawn by the wounded giant, and then another, feeling Theron's eyes on him. He stopped a respectful distance away, but not out of fear. He'd faced down malfunctioning fusion cores and rogue AI. A grumpy alien commander wouldn't deter him. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady in the vastness of the docking bay. Theron's expression remained unchanged, unreadable. Finally, he inclined his head. A barely perceptible nod. "You have 1 week, human. Then our negotiations resume. Let's hope your skills are as impressive as your reputation." The hum of the Victorious resonated through Jace's bones as he stepped into the heart of the beast. He'd been granted access, a small team of wary Valorian technicians trailing behind him like nervous shadows. He ignored them, focusing instead on the intricate web of conduits, energy regulators, and shimmering coils that made up the ship's hyperdrive core. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a symphony of alien engineering that should have been beyond his comprehension. Yet, as he traced the flow of energy, his mind buzzed with intuition. He felt like a conductor in front of a silent orchestra, able to sense the discordant note that threw off the entire melody. "Diagnostics?" he asked, not bothering to turn around. A datapad materialized in his hand, filled with a cascade of figures and symbols that meant nothing to him. "I need readings, energy fluctuations, thermal output, the works." He could feel the Valorians exchanging hesitant glances, their unease tangible. They moved with an almost robotic efficiency, their four-fingered hands dancing across alien consoles, but their movements lacked the fluidity, the instinctive grace of someone who truly understood the heart of a machine. Hours melted into days as Jace delved deeper into the guts of the Victorious. He slept little, ate even less, subsisting on nutrient bars and the bitter tang of caffeine pills. The Valorians, true to their word, provided him with everything he asked for, but their skepticism hung in the air like a thick fog. "It's the regulator." One of the technicians finally ventured on the third day, his voice hesitant. "Core regulator 7B. It's malfunctioning." Jace didn't look up from where he was sprawled beneath a network of pulsating conduits. "And what have your esteemed engineers done about it?" "Replaced it, of course," another technician chimed in. "Twice? With no effect?" "Of course," Jace muttered, tracing a finger along a conduit, feeling for any inconsistencies in its energy flow. The regulator was a complex piece of machinery, but it wasn't the problem. It was a symptom.
He spent another day and a half confirming his suspicions. The energy fluctuations, the thermal spikes, the subtle tremors that rippled through the ship, they all pointed to something smaller, something easily overlooked. Finally, he found it. A microscopic vibration in a seemingly insignificant coupling, a tiny flaw in its molecular structure, imperceptible to the naked eye and likely dismissed as irrelevant by the Valorians' sophisticated scanners. But this tiny tremor, amplified by the immense power of the hyperdrive, threw off the entire energy flow, creating a cascade of problems that culminated in the malfunctioning regulator. Jace sat back on his heels, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was beautiful, really, a testament to the interconnected nature of even the most complex systems, a reminder that sometimes the smallest flaws could bring down the mightiest giants. Now all he had to do was convince the Valorians. The conference room was as cold and sterile as a surgical theater. Jace, still smelling faintly of engine grease and sweat, stood before a curved table that seemed to stretch into infinity. Around him sat a dozen Valorian officers, their expressions carefully neutral, their eyes like chips of obsidian reflecting the dim light. Theron, at the head of the table, emanated an aura of controlled impatience that would have made a lesser man crumble. Jace, however, felt a thrill course through him, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with proving doubters wrong. He placed a small, unassuming component on the table, its surface reflecting the dim light. "This," he said, his voice amplified by the translator implant, "is your problem." He saw the confusion flicker across their faces, the barely perceptible tightening of lips, the subtle tilt of heads. "That?" One of the officers finally spoke, his voice laced with disbelief. "That insignificant coupling? We ran diagnostics, replaced it multiple times. And did you look at its molecular structure? Analyze the resonant frequency of its vibrations?" Jace countered, enjoying the stunned silence that followed. He'd spent hours poring over their technical manuals, learning their language, their terminology. It was time to use it against them. "The coupling's vibrations, though microscopic, resonate at a frequency that interferes with the energy flow of the core regulator 7B, Jace continued, his voice steady. "The effect is amplified by the regulator's proximity to the main power conduit, creating a feedback loop that cripples the entire hyperdrive system." He saw a flicker of understanding in the eyes of a young female Valorian, her uniform bearing the markings of a junior technician. She leaned forward, her gaze darting between Jace and the coupling on the table. "But that's—" she started, then hesitated, as if unsure whether to speak her mind. "Impossible?" Jace finished for her, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Improbable, maybe, but not impossible." He met her gaze, holding it with a quiet intensity. "Everything is connected. You build machines of incredible power, but you forget that even the smallest element can have an impact on the whole." The young Valorian nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the coupling. Then she looked up at Theron, her expression a mix of apprehension and excitement. "He might be onto something, Commander. The resonant frequency theory." Theron silenced her with a raised hand, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he studied Jace, his gaze sharp enough to cut steel. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rumbling. "And what, human, do you propose we do about it?" Jace allowed himself a small, private smile. He had their attention now. More importantly, he had the attention of the young technician, the only one who seemed willing to look beyond the preconceived notions of human inferiority. "It's not about replacement," he said, keeping his voice level, resisting the urge to showboat. Now was not the time for ego, not with the fate of his mission, perhaps even the future of human-Valorian relations, hanging in the balance. "It's about stabilization." He saw the confusion ripple through the assembled Valorians. Replacing a faulty component was their go-to solution, the hallmark of their advanced modular technology. Stabilization, on the other hand, smacked of improvisation, of tinkering, a distinctly less sophisticated approach. "I've analyzed your energy dampeners," Jace continued, pulling up a holographic schematic of the Victorious' engine room. "With a few modifications, we can create a dampening field around the coupling, negating its vibrations without disrupting the energy flow of the surrounding systems." He pointed to a cluster of nodes on the schematic. These dampeners, typically used for your weapons systems, emit energy at a frequency that... He launched into a detailed explanation, Drawing on his knowledge of their technology gleaned from countless hours spent with their manuals, his mind working overtime to translate his understanding into their language, their concepts. He could see some of the officers struggling to follow him, their expressions flickering between confusion and disdain. But the young technician, Mira, her name tag finally registering in his mind, followed his every word, her eyes bright with understanding. When he finished, silence descended upon the room, broken only by the whirring of the ventilation system. Finally, Theron spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "This stabilization," he said, the alien word sounding strange yet strangely fitting. "It is possible." "Not only possible," Jace said, meeting his gaze head on. "It's the only way. Replacing the coupling won't work, not without re-engineering half the hyperdrive core. My way, we can have your ship up and running in 48 hours. He saw the doubt lingering in Theron's eyes, the ingrained skepticism that came from dealing with a species they considered inferior. But he also saw something else, a flicker of hope, perhaps even a grudging admiration. "Very well, human," Theron said finally, his voice laced with an undercurrent of challenge. "You have your 48 hours. Do not disappoint us." The engine room of the Victorious became Jace's crucible. He worked with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years, the weight of 1,000 skeptical eyes fueling his every movement. The Valorian technicians, initially hesitant, were gradually won over by his quiet competence, his unwavering focus. He didn't bark orders or demand subservience. He simply pointed, explained, and let his work speak for itself. Mira, true to her initial spark of understanding, became his most valuable asset. She navigated the cultural divide, translating not just words but also intent, smoothing over the inevitable misunderstandings that arose from working with technology so fundamentally different from his own. "Your dampeners," he said, one particularly frustrating afternoon, pointing to a cluster of humming modules. "They lack the fine-tuning needed for this kind of stabilization. Too much raw power, not enough finesse." Mira translated for the benefit of the two Valorian technicians flanking them, their expressions a mix of confusion and offense. "Finesse?" one of them finally echoed, his translator implant spitting out the word with a strange inflection. "Our technology is the most precise in the galaxy. We can split an atom with a thought." Jace had to bite back a chuckle. They were like children playing with explosives, impressed by the bang but clueless about the underlying principles. "Precision without understanding is like a scalpel in the hands of a brute," he said, meeting their gaze with a calm intensity. "Powerful, but ultimately crude." He saw the flicker of anger in their eyes, quickly masked by professional courtesy. He didn't blame them for their skepticism. He was, after all, just a mechanic from a backwater planet, daring to lecture them on the intricacies of their own technology. "Look," he continued, softening his tone, "your dampeners are designed to dissipate energy, to create a void. But we need to manipulate that energy, to shape it, to create a specific frequency wave that will neutralize the vibrations from the coupling." He pulled up a series of holographic schematics, highlighting the modifications he needed. "We need to create a feedback loop within the dampeners themselves, using their own energy output to fine-tune the frequency." He spent the next hour explaining his solution, drawing on his knowledge of harmonic resonance, a concept seemingly alien to the Valorians, but as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He saw the understanding dawn in Mira's eyes, the way she translated not just his words but also the underlying principles, her voice taking on a passionate cadence. By the time he finished, the skepticism in the technician's eyes had given way to cautious curiosity. They might not have fully grasped the complexities of his solution, but they recognized the elegance, the sheer audacity of his approach. The final hours were a blur of activity. Jace, running on fumes and sheer willpower, pushed himself and his makeshift team to the limit. They worked side by side, human and Valorian, their movements synchronizing into a silent ballet of precision and purpose. The air crackled with nervous energy, the silence broken only by the hiss of welding torches and the low hum of recalibrating instruments. Mira, her initial hesitation replaced by a quiet confidence, proved to be an invaluable ally. She anticipated Jace's needs before he even voiced them, her nimble fingers dancing across alien consoles with a speed and precision that belied her junior rank. More importantly, she acted as a buffer between Jace and the growing contingent of skeptical Valorians who gathered outside the engine room, their faces pressed against the observation windows, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Almost there," Jace muttered, more to himself than to Mira as he made the final adjustments to the modified dampener array. He could feel the weight of their gazes, the pressure of their expectations, but he refused to let it rattle him. He'd come too far, fought too hard to let doubt creep in now. He ran his hand over the smooth surface of the dampener casing, feeling the subtle thrum of contained energy. It wasn't just about technical expertise, not anymore. It was about proving a point, about showing the universe that human ingenuity wasn't bound by fancy technology or preconceived notions. "Power up the core," he finally said, his voice hoarse but steady. Mira relayed the order, her gaze meeting his for a brief, electrifying moment. He saw a flicker of anxiety in her eyes, quickly replaced by a resolute calm that mirrored his own. The lights in the engine room flickered as the hyperdrive core came online. The familiar hum of the Victorious intensified, resonating through the deck plates, through their bones, through the very air they breathed. For a moment, everything held its breath, suspended between hope and disaster. Then, a wave of energy, visible even to the naked eye, washed over the engine room, emanating from the modified dampener array. The humming of the hyperdrive core, previously erratic and discordant, smoothed out, becoming a deep, resonant thrum, a symphony of perfectly balanced energy. Jace exhaled, the tension draining from his body, leaving him feeling lightheaded and exhilarated. He glanced at Mira, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Told you it would work." The news of Jace's success spread through the Valorian station like a shockwave. Gone were the dismissive glances, the barely concealed skepticism. In their place, a hesitant curiosity bloomed, tinged with a grudging respect that even the most stoic Valorians couldn't quite hide. Jace, now showered and sporting a fresh set of borrowed coveralls, stood once again in the conference room. This time, however, the atmosphere was palpably different. The air buzzed not with tension but with a subdued excitement. Even Theron, his normally impassive face softened with a hint of a smile, seemed almost approachable. "You have proven your skills, human," Theron said, his deep voice resonating through the room. "The Victorious is operational. Your unconventional methods, though unorthodox, have yielded impressive results." Jace nodded, acknowledging the compliment with a curt nod. He wasn't here for praise, though a small part of him, the part that still remembered the sting of being underestimated, reveled in the moment. "My engineers have completed a thorough analysis of your modifications," Theron continued, his tone laced with a newfound respect. "They are ingenious. You have found a solution where we saw only an impasse." Jace knew better than to attribute his success to mere ingenuity. It wasn't about being smarter, it was about seeing the problem from a different angle, about applying knowledge gained from years of hands-on experience, of coaxing life into aging, imperfect machines. "Your technology is impressive, Commander," Jace said, choosing his words carefully. "But like any complex system, it's vulnerable to unforeseen variables. Sometimes the smallest detail—" He trailed off, realizing he was starting to sound like a broken record. Besides, something else was bothering him, a nagging suspicion that lingered like a bad aftertaste. "Commander," he said, his voice taking on a serious tone, "can we talk about the coupling, the one that caused the malfunction?" Theron's brow furrowed slightly. "What about it?" "You said your engineers replaced it multiple times. Did they, by any chance, analyze the faulty ones? Look for signs of—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Tampering?" The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken implications. Theron's eyes narrowed, the obsidian depths turning flinty. "Tampering? That is a serious accusation, human." "And a serious possibility," Jace countered, his gut churning with a certainty that had nothing to do with engine schematics. That kind of molecular flaw, the resonant frequency. It could be a deliberate design, sabotage. The air in the conference room crackled with tension. Gone was the tentative camaraderie, the shared sense of accomplishment. In its place, a chill settled, as if a dark cloud had passed over the sun. Theron's gaze, no longer merely assessing, felt like a physical weight, pinning Jace in place. "Explain yourself, human, clearly and with proof. Such accusations levied without merit carry severe consequences, even for—" He paused, the unspoken words, "your kind," hanging heavy in the air. Jace stood his ground. He'd faced down malfunctioning fusion cores hot enough to melt steel and stared down rogue AI constructs threatening to consume entire systems. He wouldn't be intimidated by a disapproving alien, even one who commanded fleets that could shatter planets. "It's not just about the flaw itself," he said, his voice steady, choosing each word carefully. "It's about the context. You see, that kind of molecular degradation, it's not something that just happens. Not in a component as critical and as shielded as that coupling. It takes a specific set of circumstances, a precise manipulation at a molecular level." He saw skepticism flicker in the eyes of some of the Valorians, but he pressed on, drawing on years of experience, of poring over data logs, of chasing ghosts in the machine. Whoever introduced that flaw, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew the precise resonant frequency to trigger the cascade, the exact point of failure that would cripple the hyperdrive without destroying the core. He turned his gaze directly to Theron, holding the commander's obsidian gaze with his own. "Tell me, Commander, in the time your engineers were analyzing the Victorious, did anyone investigate the possibility of internal sabotage, or was that deemed too impossible?" Theron's expression remained unreadable, but Jace noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his four-fingered hand clenched around the edge of the table. The accusation, once voiced aloud, seemed to echo through the room, bouncing off the sterile walls, settling like dust on the polished surface of the table. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Finally, Theron spoke, his voice low, devoid of its usual booming authority. "This line of inquiry," he said, each word measured, "is unorthodox, but not entirely without merit." He turned his gaze to a pair of officers flanking him, their faces as impassive as statues. "Inform the Security Directorate. Tell them Commander Theron requests a discreet inquiry into the matter. All previous findings regarding the Victorious are to be re-examined. Leave no stone unturned." The officers, their expressions betraying a hint of surprise at their commander's uncharacteristic acceptance of the human's theory, bowed their heads in acknowledgement and quickly left the room. Theron turned his gaze back to Jace, a flicker of something akin to gratitude momentarily breaking through his stoic facade. "You have a keen eye, human," he conceded. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than we initially perceived." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Jace, officially a guest of the Valorians but confined to a luxurious, if somewhat sterile, suite, found himself both restless and strangely energized. He had access to their network, a treasure trove of technical data that made his engineer's heart sing. He spent hours poring over schematics, comparing the Victorious incident to other seemingly unrelated malfunctions across the Valorian fleet. Mira, defying what Jace suspected were strict protocols, became his unofficial liaison, smuggling him extra data chips and translating whispered rumors from the depths of the station's gossip mill. "It's unheard of," she said one evening, her normally vibrant features etched with worry. "A full security audit, initiated by Theron himself, based on the word of a human." She met Jace's gaze, her eyes betraying a mix of admiration and fear. "They say Theron sees this as a test not just of your skills, but of our loyalty." Jace understood. His accusation, however politely phrased, had struck a nerve, exposing a crack in the seemingly monolithic facade of Valorian society. "And what about you, Mira?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "Where does your loyalty lie?" She stiffened, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting a security team to burst in and arrest them both for treason. "My loyalty," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, "is to the truth, and to those who have the courage to speak it, no matter the cost." Her words, spoken with a quiet conviction that belied her youth and her station, echoed in the silence of the room. Their conversation was interrupted by a chime from the comm panel. It was Theron, his image flickering to life on the wall screen, his expression grim. "Human," he said, his voice devoid of its usual formality. "We have uncovered something troubling. You were right. There was tampering. A faction within our ranks. They call themselves the Ascendants. They seek to destabilize the Empire, to seize control." Theron's image flickered, his usually impassive face betraying a flicker of vulnerability that surprised Jace. The Victorious, it was just the beginning. They have infiltrated our shipyards, our academies, even our command structure. He paused, his gaze locking onto Jace's, a silent plea for understanding, for help, passing between them. "We need you, human," Theron said, his voice raspy with exhaustion. "We need your unique perspective, your eye for detail. Will you help us stop them before it's too late?" Jace didn't hesitate. He was a mechanic, not a soldier or a politician. But standing there, looking into the eyes of a leader facing betrayal from within, he felt a primal urge to help, to fix what was broken even if it meant venturing into uncharted territory. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice firm, the answer already forming in his mind. The relief on Theron's face was palpable. "The Ascendants," he said, his voice regaining a measure of its usual command. "They believe themselves to be the next evolution of our kind. They see our adherence to tradition, to what they call stagnant technology, as weakness." He gestured to the wall screen, a schematic of a sleek, menacing-looking vessel materializing beside his image. "They are building a ship, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen. They call it the Harbinger." Jace studied the image, his mind already dissecting the ship's unconventional design, its aggressive lines, its pulsating energy signature. It was an abomination, a perversion of Valorian technology, cobbled together from stolen designs, powered by a desperation that bordered on madness. "I've seen the data," Theron continued, his voice grim. "Their methods are chaotic. They disregard safety protocols, push their technology to the breaking point. They believe their superior intellect will compensate for their recklessness, but—" He trailed off, his gaze meeting Jace's. "They underestimate the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance that governs even the most advanced systems. They are playing with forces they do not fully understand. And they've underestimated the human element," Jace added, more to himself than to Theron. The Ascendants, for all their supposed brilliance, had made a classic mistake. They'd assumed logic and ambition were the only driving forces in the universe. They'd forgotten about factors like intuition, improvisation, the sheer bloody-mindedness that came from facing down impossible odds. "We believe they are close to completing the Harbinger," Theron said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "Once it's operational, they plan to use it to reshape the Empire in their own image. We have to stop them, Jace. You're our only hope." Jace looked at the schematic, at the alien symbols that represented conduits and power sources in weapon systems. It was a puzzle, a deadly one, but he'd solved puzzles before. And somewhere, deep down, a spark of excitement flickered alongside the cold certainty of danger. He was about to face the ultimate challenge, to pit his human ingenuity against the hubris of a fallen empire. "Show me everything," he said, his voice a quiet rumble, the sound of an engine coming online. "Every schematic, every data log, every scrap of information you have on the Harbinger. It's time to dismantle this puzzle piece by piece." Jace delved into the data with the fervor of a man possessed. Days blurred into nights as he immersed himself in the alien schematics, his mind transforming into a battlefield where human intuition clashed with the elegant but flawed logic of the Ascendant's designs. The Valorians, their initial skepticism replaced by a desperate hope, granted him unprecedented access to their most guarded secrets. He roamed the bowels of the station, accompanied by nervous technicians and grim-faced security officers, examining salvage components from sabotaged ships, dissecting captured drones, his hands tracing the ghostly echoes of the Ascendant's twisted brilliance. The deeper he went, the more he understood Theron's anxieties. The Ascendants weren't just rebels. They were fanatics, drunk on their own perceived intellectual superiority. Their technology reflected this dangerous arrogance. They pushed boundaries, disregarded safety protocols, all in pursuit of ultimate power. "They're obsessed with efficiency," Mira said one evening, her normally vibrant face pale with exhaustion. They were huddled in Jace's makeshift workshop, surrounded by holographic projections and discarded data chips. They see redundancy, adaptability, even creativity as weaknesses. Jace grunted, tracing a finger along the energy flow of a particularly convoluted weapon system. "And that's their downfall," he muttered. "They've engineered themselves into a corner, Every system interconnected, every component operating at its absolute limit. One wrong variable, one unforeseen stress point, and the whole thing goes critical. He knew he was looking for more than just a technical flaw. The Ascendants were meticulous, their work imbued with a cold, calculating precision that was both admirable and terrifying. He needed to understand their mindset, their motivations, to find the crack in their seemingly impenetrable armor. He found it, not in their technology, but in their philosophy. The Ascendants believed in a rigid hierarchy, a universe ruled by logic and cold, hard data. They dismissed concepts like intuition, improvisation, the messy, unpredictable nature of organic life as inferior, even detrimental, to progress. And that, Jace realized with a growing sense of grim satisfaction, was their Achilles' heel. Because while they were busy building their perfect, sterile machine, they'd forgotten one crucial detail. The universe didn't play by their rules. "They're building a weapon," he said, more to himself than to Mira, his voice a low rumble in the silent workshop. "But they've forgotten what makes a weapon truly dangerous." He looked up at Mira, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. "It's not just about firepower, Mira. It's about adaptability, about unpredictability, about that little spark of chaos that separates the living from the merely programmed." He could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the Valorian logic grappling with his decidedly less structured approach. "Chaos?" she echoed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jace grinned, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Oh yeah," he said, his voice laced with a dangerous excitement. "The Ascendants are about to get a crash course in human ingenuity. And trust me, it's going to be explosive." The closer they got to pinpointing the Harbinger's location, the heavier the atmosphere grew on the Valorian station. Even the air, usually sterile and temperature-controlled, seemed to crackle with a nervous energy. Patrols doubled, then tripled, their shimmering uniforms reflecting the omnipresent glow of security grids. Whispers followed Jace down the corridors, a mixture of fear and wary respect in their hushed tones. He worked tirelessly, fueled by a potent combination of caffeine pills, nutrient bars, and the sheer audacity of the task ahead. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but he'd spent enough time stripping down warships to understand the delicate balance between creation and destruction. The Harbinger, as he'd come to realize, wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement, a testament to the Ascendants' hubris, their belief that they could bend the universe to their will through sheer intellectual force. And that, Jace knew, was their fatal flaw. He stood before Theron in a grim-faced assembly of Valorian officers, a holographic projection of the Harbinger shimmering between them. The ship was a masterpiece of alien engineering, sleek, predatory, every line screaming of power barely contained. "The primary weapon system," Jace said, tapping a cluster of pulsating nodes on the projection. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. Draws energy directly from the hyperdrive core, amplifies it through a series of harmonic resonators." He trailed off, shaking his head. "The power output, it's off the charts. They're talking about obliterating entire planets with this thing." "And we believe they will," Theron said, his voice heavy with a weariness that belied his warrior's physique. "They see themselves as architects of a new order, one built on the ashes of the old." Jace looked at the assembled Valorians, their faces drawn and haggard, their eyes reflecting the weight of a galaxy hanging in the balance. "We have a plan," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension in the room. He outlined his strategy, laying out a series of calculated risks and seemingly impossible maneuvers, exploiting the very arrogance that fueled the Ascendants' designs. He spoke of vulnerabilities hidden in plain sight, of exploiting the interconnectedness of their systems, of turning their own weapons against them. The Valorians listened intently, their faces betraying a mixture of skepticism and a desperate hope. "It's risky," one of the officers finally said, his voice laced with doubt. "The slightest miscalculation." "We don't have a choice," Theron interrupted, his voice firm. He looked at Jace, his obsidian gaze holding a newfound respect. "We have to trust your judgment, human. You found the flaw in our thinking. Now show us the flaw in theirs." Jace's heart pounded as he stepped aboard the Valorian assault ship, his makeshift team of Valorian technicians, led by Mira, following close behind. The Harbinger loomed in the distance, a dark shadow against the star-speckled void, a symbol of the Ascendant's twisted ambition. This was it, the culmination of weeks of relentless work, sleepless nights, and the quiet, burning determination to outthink a foe who believed themselves invincible. The Valorian fleet approached the Harbinger with caution, shields raised, weapon systems primed. Theron's voice crackled through the comms, a steadying presence amidst the tension. "Remember, this isn't just a battle for survival. It's a battle for our future. Jace, Mira, may your courage guide us." Jace glanced at Mira, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and resolve. They shared a silent nod, a mutual acknowledgement of the gravity of their task. The plan was simple in theory, but fraught with peril. Disable the Harbinger's primary weapons system by exploiting its inherent design flaw, then hold out long enough for the Valorian fleet to neutralize the remaining threat. As they closed in on the Harbinger, Jace's mind raced through the intricate details of their strategy. He'd identified the harmonic resonators as the linchpin of the enemy ship's power, a delicate balance that could be disrupted with the right application of energy. If they could destabilize the resonators, the entire system would collapse, rendering the weapon useless. The assault ship docked with the Harbinger, and Jace's team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the airlock and breaching the enemy vessel. They encountered sporadic resistance, but the element of surprise was on their side. Valorian security teams neutralized the Ascendant guards with swift precision, clearing a path for Jace and Mira to reach the core. The engine room of the Harbinger was a cathedral of alien technology, pulsating with an eerie, rhythmic glow. Jace immediately set to work, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision as he calibrated the dampening fields around the resonators. Mira monitored the energy fluctuations, her voice steady and reassuring despite the escalating danger. "Energy levels are stabilizing," she reported, her fingers dancing over the control console. "We're almost there." Jace wiped sweat from his brow, the heat from the core searing through his coveralls. "Just a few more adjustments," he muttered, his focus laser sharp. A sudden tremor rocked the ship, throwing him off balance. "They're onto us," Mira shouted, her voice rising above the alarms blaring throughout the engine room. "Ascendant reinforcements inbound." Jace gritted his teeth, refusing to let the encroaching danger distract him. "Hold them off," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been through hell and back. "We're so close." The next few minutes were a blur of frenetic activity, a desperate dance against the ticking clock. Jace's hands moved with a speed and precision that bordered on the superhuman, guided by the instinct that had always set him apart. Finally, with a triumphant shout, he completed the final adjustment. "Now, Mira!" he yelled, his voice hoarse but filled with triumph. Mira activated the dampening field, and the resonator's pulsations began to falter, their harmonic balance disrupted. The Harbinger shuddered violently, the destabilized energy reverberating through its core. "Get out of there!" Theron's voice boomed through the comms, filled with urgency. Jace and Mira bolted for the exit, their path illuminated by the flickering lights of a ship in its death throes. They barely made it to the assault ship before the Harbinger began to implode, its formidable power turned against itself in a cataclysmic display. The Valorian fleet, emboldened by the sight of the enemy's flagship falling apart, surged forward, overwhelming the remaining Ascendant forces. The battle was fierce, but the tide had turned irrevocably in their favor. By the time the Harbinger was reduced to glowing wreckage, the Ascendant's insurrection lay in ruins. Back on the Valorian station, Jace was greeted with a hero's welcome. The air, once tense with doubt and suspicion, now hummed with a palpable sense of relief and gratitude. Theron met him at the docking bay, his imposing figure softened by an uncharacteristic smile. "You did it, human," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "You saved us all." Jace, exhausted but exhilarated, shook the commander's hand. "We did it together," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Valorians, each one a testament to the unlikely alliance that had turned the tide. Mira stood beside him, her eyes bright with pride. "You taught us to see beyond the limits of our own understanding," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "To embrace the chaos, the unpredictability, and to find strength in it." Jace smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that went beyond mere victory. "And you showed me that even the most advanced technology needs a human touch." As the station erupted in celebration, Jace felt a deep sense of connection with these alien beings who had once seemed so beyond his reach. He had bridged the gap between worlds not through force or intimidation, but through understanding and collaboration. And in doing so, he'd proven that even in the vastness of the cosmos, the smallest spark of human ingenuity could light the way.